Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. My guests this week are two lovely people who I just called professionals and they laughed. So, I don't know what you want to do with that, listeners, but I'm sure they are near and dear to your hearts if you are in Windham County. And that is, welcome, Randy Holhut, who is the news editor for The Commons down here in Windham County, and journalist extraordinaire John Walters, who is the force behind the Vermont Political Observer, which is an online blog that he has been fiercely posting a lot on lately. Even though it's the summer and even though the legislative session is out, does not mean that the news stops in Vermont. So, Randy, John, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
the grumpy old men.
Well, it's good to have grumpy old men on some every now and then. You know, you gotta we gotta get our grumpy quota. From time to time.
You'll get it today.
I was once sitting in the house balcony next to Dave Graham, formerly of the Associated Press, and we both have like long white beards. And Mark Johnson, who was there, looked at us and said, "It's the Smith brothers."
Braden Mark?
Cough remedy.
Oh,
So
no.
anyway. But enough about beards.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm feeling left out.
And so did Mark.
Oh, he would have, yes. So I'd like for us to start with a post that John has put on his blog on the vpo.org. And I suspect it's something that Randy is also seeing, even down here in Windham County, and that is how the Trump administration and many of the decisions it's making are starting to ripple out into Vermont. Specifically for what you were talking about, John, is Governor Phil Scott, and how is he responding to the requests coming down from the federal government to either get state data, use state resources, that type of thing. And for you, John, you're asking the question, like, where is it teamwork to work with our partners at the federal level, and where is it capitulation? I think was broadly the question you were asking. And what was the conclusion you came to?
Well, really the conclusion, although I kind of buried it in a single paragraph, is that, Phil Scott is trying to walk a very fine line. He doesn't want to overtly offend the Trump administration if he can avoid it. He also does not want to alienate all the Democratic and moderate voters who regularly turn out to vote for him. So he doesn't want to seem like a Trump puppet either. The problem with walking this line is that Donald Trump engages every day in redrawing and blurring the line. We are really just beginning to see, several months into the Trump term, that this is continuing to escalate bit by bit. It's the old, frog in the boiling water thing, where if you throw the frog in the boiling water, it's just instant death. If you throw the frog into cold water and turn on the heat, then the frog thinks it's a nice warm bath for a while until it dies. And, it's getting a little worse all the time. And I think the demands on Vermont and on every state and locality will continue to escalate. We saw that in the administration most recently redid its list of sanctuary jurisdictions and greatly reduced it. It was like 500 jurisdictions, which was ridiculous. Now it's less than 40. And Vermont is on the list, although the governor has actually resisted actually making us a sanctuary state. So I think it's only a matter of time before the administration goes after those sanctuary jurisdictions. It's already started to with New York. And, the governor is going to be put in more and more uncomfortable situations. And at some point, he's either going to have to make a stand or he's going to turn out to be that frog in the warming pot of water.
It was telling that the day after he turned over the list of SNAP recipients to the federal government, that the sanctuary list came out with Vermont on it. You don't appease a bully. The bully always wants something more.
Mm-hmm.
And the only appropriate way to deal with a bully is punch him in the face. And we know Scott hasn't the guts to do anything to really stand up to him, like say some of the Democratic governors are doing right now with the runaway Texas reps.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the Douglas Democrats, who became the Scott Democrats in the recent elections, the ones that will vote for the person supposedly and not the party. This might be the bridge too far for some of them if Scott goes into full-blown cooperation with the administration. I think he knows that it would be political suicide in Vermont to do anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you saw that illustrated last Sunday when he held an event with EPA Secretary Lee Zeldin at a farm in Fairleigh. He did not, his team did not announce it in advance, as far as I can tell. There were no reporters or independent cameras there. The only thing that appeared was a Phil Scott Facebook post, including several photographs from the event after the fact. And, the TV news coverage reflected that. They depended entirely on the photos and the information from Scott's Facebook post. So, you invite a cabinet office secretary into your state. He's a member of your own party, and you're afraid to tell anybody about it in advance, presumably because they would have had a massive protest outside the Fairleigh farm. But, that's kind of where Phil Scott is at, and that's where the Trump administration is at. And I think it's only going to get more and more uncomfortable for him.
So I was actually wondering, the Fairleigh event, if the decision not to put out a press release may have also rested with the federal level, because, you think of a lot of the town halls that Republicans had been holding and now they've stopped because, again, they didn't want the protests. So I actually wondered if maybe that was also a request from the feds.
Could be. I mean, they saw what happened to J.D. Vance when he went skiing in Vermont.
Yeah, it's a brilliant bit of protest, too. I think an inspiration for protests succeeding then.
I know. I mean, there were some very good signs at that protest that I still think fondly on. I think the other thing you brought up, John, in your post that I find intriguing was you mentioned the work of Attorney General Charity Clark. Yep. And what pinged my interest before you talk about that is in a previous blog post, I remember several weeks ago now, you posed the question, Charity Clark is independently elected by the voters. So does she work for the voters, Vermonters, or does she work for the government? I mean, for the governor, I think was the question you asked. And it felt a little bit like that was playing out in this situation too.
Yeah, I mean, there's an inherent conflict in how the Attorney General's office is defined. I don't know if this is true in other states or not, but the Attorney General is the people's attorney and represents the people's interests. So, in federal lawsuits and multi-state lawsuits, Charity Clark joins with other Democratic attorneys general. But at the same time, the Attorney General's other job is to be the advocate for the state of Vermont and to defend Vermont's interests in court, which means she will find herself in court defending the Scott administration when there's a challenge to something that they are doing. So that she, the best example of this is the Global Warming Solutions Act and climate, where she will eventually be defending the Scott administration if there is a lawsuit against Vermont for failing to meet climate targets. At the same time that she has joined in multi-state lawsuits seeking to defend climate action. It's inherent in the office, and it's got to make attorneys general uncomfortable from time to time. And it also, maybe that's why rarely does an attorney general run for governor, because, on the state level, you are very significantly constrained in what you can do in terms of, generating your own policy profile.
Well, it's probably harder too when you're dealing with divided government. When you have, when most of the Democratic attorneys general have Democratic governors, so it's a little easier.
Yeah, there's in the case of the SNAP data, Charity Clark made it clear that she would have been happily gone to court with the other Democratic AGs, but the Scott administration's position prevented her from doing so.
And I find that an interesting conflict, because at least thinking of the communities in this neck of the wood, I can't speak for all of Vermont, but I think of a lot of my neighbors, and they would have preferred the lawsuit over handing over the information.
Yeah. Well, when you see how vehement the response from the Democratic office holders as well as the party against over that decision to hand over the SNAP accountants, Charity was in a difficult spot, certainly, but she knows that I think she knows that she can take a pass in this one, and it won't hurt her too much next year.
Well, to be fair to our political leaders, it is sort of a tough spot, because Vermont, we think about the Entergy lawsuit, and Vermont has gotten spanked by the supremacy clause before. I hope I'm using the right term. And so I think some of our political leaders might be a little shy around, going head to head with the federal government. But, we also want, what I'm struggling with is, I keep coming back to there's going to be life after this moment. And so how do we prepare for that? And so I guess I'm just wondering, how do all these pieces fit together? You got the supremacy clause, you've got Trump moving the goalpost all the time. You've got the fact that, it would be easier perhaps to find allies in the federal government than to make enemies of the whole federal government. And yet it's quite clear at times that Vermont policy is not in line with the current federal trajectories and policies. So, I don't know, what are you sitting with when I ask that kind of muddled question? Because it's a muddled landscape, I think, in many ways.
Yeah, part of the Trump administration's strategy is to make it muddled so that we are all off balance and we don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, leadership through chaos.
Or the three C's: chaos, corruption, and cruelty.
Yep, and just on the policy level, which we haven't really talked about, we really have yet to see how Trump actions on things like reducing food benefits, reducing housing subsidies, and reducing healthcare assistance are going to play out. The Commons, or Andy's publication, did a really good article a few weeks ago about the Brattleboro Memorial Hospital wondering how it's going to stay in business once these, Medicaid cuts go into effect. So, in addition to the policy stuff and the ICE enforcement and, all this other stuff, there's also just the federal financial aspect of it, which we worry about and are just beginning to get an inkling of, how big an impact this might be.
Not to mention how much of the state government is funded with federal money.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, granted, not as much as other places. Like West Virginia's 50%.
Ouch.
Yeah.
So I guess it. Oh, go ahead, Randy. Sorry.
But of course, they voted for Trump more than anybody else.
Humans are slow to learn sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, does it just come down to we need to keep talking to our lawmakers so they know where Vermonters stand and hope that gives them, the courage or the fortitude they need?
Yeah, I think all the protests help. It may not feel like it at the time, but the numbers and the number of areas, number of cities and towns, large and small, where people turn out, I think it does make a difference, at least in terms of putting a little backbone in the Democrats in Montpelier and DC.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would agree with John that the protests have steadily grown as the months have gone by, and not just the usual suspects showing up at these things. Although, of course, Vermont being as gray as it is, you get a lot of gray-haired folk who have done this many times for many different causes. But
they keep showing up.
Yes, and they're younger people joining them because they know their future's definitely in danger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was their age, it was Reagan, and that was the future we were going facing when we left college at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost looks like a golden age now compared to the level of incompetence and corruption and cruelty that we're seeing here. But every president in my lifetime has just been a descent into well, it's a long way from John F. Kennedy to Donald Trump. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I was their age, it was Nixon. So.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to say Nixon was the last liberal president. Well, think of it: the EPA, Nixon, the wanting federal wage and price controls, Nixon.
Yep.
Clean Water, Clean Air Act, Nixon.
That's a good point.
Of course, there was a massive Democratic majority in Congress at the time, and massive public support for clean water and clean air. But he like Eisenhower, he went with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Nixon did try that whole undercutting democracy thing in both 68 and 72. But
yeah, and eventually came to bite him in 74.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and we're just waiting for that moment now with Mr. Trump.
Which would require some Republicans to grow a spine.
Yeah.
And
maybe we can do a GoFundMe for porta spines for the Republicans in Congress. I know Becca would certainly sign off on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used to talk about Reagan as the Teflon president, but Trump seems to have coated himself in extra layers, it seems.
The Nordic Ware president?
There you go. Well, before we still have a few minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about what Becca Balint's up to. Joyce Marcel sat down, had a long conversation with her. Randy, would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Becca and Joyce have an interesting relationship. I mean, we've known Becca since she was a goofy middle school teacher in Brattleboro,
Mm-hmm.
and her and Becca and her chief of staff there, Sophie Pollock, have been really good about giving us time to sit down and have Becca just open up to us and let us know what she's doing and how she's holding up. And the how she's holding up thing was a big part of the conversation that appeared in this week's paper, because seems to be the question everyone's asking. I mean, how do you do that? How do you sit in a room with these people? And when she admitted, they won't look her in the eye because they know they've sold out.
Mm-hmm.
But she's managing to find allies because even as the Republicans are still voting for the worst of Trump's policies, they're still hearing it from their constituents that maybe Medicaid cuts not such a good idea. With closing our hospitals down, not such a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Raiding the farms and taking away the agricultural workers, not such a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole thing with that is that, oh, you were supposed to hurt them. You weren't supposed to hurt me.
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, then the message is it's fine if you're cruel to someone else, which, if you're thinking that, you need to sit down and reflect just a little bit.
Well, besides the porta some empathy transfusions wouldn't hurt too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Empathy drops.
But yes, that Becca's still managing to find allies. I mean, Thomas Massie is not the person I would think that Becca would find common cause with on issues. But Massie hates the Trumps as much as any other Democrat, but just for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank you, Randy.
Yeah. Well, sunlight.
Well, it's nice to see you basking in this sunny glow, but it's better to see your face.
We don't want to get too ethereal on my end.
This is local news we're talking about after all. And how is does Becca have a strategy for finding allies, for keeping her sanity?
Well, I think it's just finding the people that are in rural America. Because we tend to forget Vermont is rural. Sometimes we forget, lose fact of that. I mean, maybe not quite as rural as some of the Midwest, but
Mm-hmm.
there's still places, what trying to imagine, say, Brattleboro without a Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, and say
Yeah.
having to go to Dartmouth for all of our care. We're down to Springfield, Massachusetts,
Mm-hmm.
but those two hospitals are in trouble too. All the hospitals are in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just it's what do you do?
Yeah.
And you just have to find the people that can help. And Becca hasn't lost her feeling that people aren't all evil. Might be a little naive that she doesn't seem to have a bit of cynicism in her. I don't know, John, if you found that to be true with Becca, that she can be a little too non-cynical.
Well, when both of us were denizens of the State House, we had a nice little connection over her background as a middle school teacher because she was trying to lead the Senate Democrats, which is not an easy task, to say the least. Many others have failed to do it, including the current, in my opinion. But basically, I said, this must be a lot like, you must be using the same skills you used, keeping track of your kids and keeping them under control. And she basically laughed and said, yep, same thing, playground dynamics.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I do think some of the best politicians are former grade school teachers.
Yep.
But middle school being the worst, the most obnoxious and the most rebellious of the various age groups.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in response to the education reform package passed by the legislature and signed into law by the governor, the state teachers union is starting a candidate school for union members.
Oh, so, interesting.
We might start seeing a wave of teachers entering politics, and I think that might well have a very beneficial effect on the dynamics of our legislature.
Interesting.
Unfortunately, it'll adversely affect education, losing good teachers.
If they leave, yes.
Yeah, good point. Well, I think my takeaway from our conversation right now is, we started talking about Scott and how he's responding to the federal government, and we're ending with Becca and her search for finding allies. And I think it's a very good reminder that we need to keep building our own coalitions, because one way the federal government has been operating is to build divisions.
Yeah.
Right? And it's okay if you take those other people, it won't hurt us. And that's just not true. And so the more we can build allyship and work together in teams, I just, that will be probably the best balm we will have to the chaos coming down from the federal government.
And as Vermonters, we know in a small town, if you need help, you need cooperation, mm-hmm. and you don't hesitate to offer help when needed. And when there's something wrong, you come together and fix it. I mean, I still remember hearing, during Irene, the FEMA people being absolutely astounded by how Vermonters jumped right in and started with the recovery before they even got there.
Mm-hmm.
And wondered,
and the number of Vermonters who were like, "What? That's just what we do." Like,
yeah,
what's unusual about this?
I mean, that's why we're here. The sense of community and that's still exists in Vermont.
Yeah, it is one of our superpowers.
Yes,
so on that note, we're going to hear from some underwriters here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. So hang tight. Randy Holhut from the Commons and John Walters from the Vermont Political Observer, and I shall return. Oops. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. If you're just joining us, I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and I'm speaking with news editor Randy Holhut from the Commons, which his title may be changing, and we'll be talking about that in a moment, as well as John Walters, who is the journalist behind the Vermont Political Observer. A few housekeeping tips before we get back into the conversation. I want to thank BCTV for taking the video version of our show and sharing it with media centers around the state. And for folks who maybe subscribe to our podcast feed, you probably noticed that a whole bunch of podcasts were released last night. It's because I'm slowly figuring out some of the kinks in my podcast system. And so I was able to catch up on some uploading. So thank you for your patience, all our streaming listeners. And hey, Randy,
don't forget,
you should remind the listeners of something.
Yes, don't forget, these opinions I express are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect the ever-expanding Vermont Independent Media and its board and whatever else that's associated with Vermont Independent Media. It's just a cranky old guy in Dummerston talking here.
And John and I have our own opinions too, which if you've watched the show before, I hope you have figured out. So thank you, John and Randy. And yes, folks, we're going to shift to talk a little bit more about what's happening around local news, local journalism. If you've been reading the VPO, you've been seeing John has been doing I guess I'll call it a special segment calls News You Should View, and where he's highlighting some of the good journalism across the state. But it sounds like, John, in highlighting good journalism, it's reminding you more and more of how there's not enough journalism in Vermont, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, the sad statistic is that over the last, I believe it's quarter century, we have lost 75% of our journalism jobs in Vermont. State House coverage is appallingly thin. I think we have talked before on this program about the fact that I am certain that the lack of State House coverage compared to past years is one reason why the governor is rarely, if ever, called to account for his administration's occasional misadventures. Even our successful outlets, VT Digger, 7 Days, and Vermont Public, have had to make some cuts and made some adjustments in how they do business and how they do news. And, all of our newspapers are struggling to one extent or another, searching for a business model that is truly sustainable. Many of us, including the Commons, nonprofit organizations now. I serve on the board of the Hardwick Gazette, which was a community-owned, a locally owned newspaper for profit, and is now a nonprofit that is, we're still, to be honest, struggling to get our financial feet under us. So those outlets are doing a lot of good work, as I find week by week. I find articles in local papers that are worth celebrating and worth sharing. At the same time, they have extremely limited resources, and we're all looking for the secret formula to make journalism truly sustainable and give our communities the coverage they deserve and that they're not fully getting right now.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a constant struggle to do what's needs to be done with what little we have, and it's encouraging that the Hardwick Gazette and the Herald of Randolph and have reached out to us for advice on how to become nonprofits. And it helps that one of your co-workers, Sandy Atkins, where I worked with her at the Reformer during my first tour there in the 1990s. But the nonprofit model is not the magic bullet, but it makes the paper a little more accountable to the readers. And the philosophy we have that that news is a public service and it should be available to everyone without a paywall or a toll booth in front of it, and that the public radio model of we'll give it to you for free, but if you like it, give us some money. It works, kinda, sorta, but it still depends a lot on the generosity of too few people. Mm-hmm. And the acquisition that the Vermont Independent Media made a few weeks ago of purchasing the Deerfield Valley News in Wilmington, it was something I really wasn't totally in favor of, because I thought it would dilute our model of buying a for-profit newspaper. And then we learned that because it was an asset sale, with a stroke of the pen, they're a nonprofit now. So we were able to help preserve a community newspaper that's well loved in that side of Windham County, and keep it out of the hands of evil corporate ownership, which has not had a particularly good track record in Vermont, and expand our reach in terms of being able to share content with the Deerfield Valley News and cover an area that we really struggled with since Olga was doing it for us when we started out as a weekly. and we had the help of a generous donor that wrote a very large check to help pay for it. So it's not like all you people that gave money to the Commons for the support us. You didn't give money to us to help us buy another newspaper. No, we got somebody else to help pick up the tab. But it's a way. This whole deal is a way of kind of strengthening two independent newspapers to do the job better, just like up in Hardwick, keeping that paper going. I mean, it's Vermont's had a history of a long history of strong community weeklies, and it's been really tested in the last 25 years, and
Yeah.
we're trying to do our part to keep it going.
Well, I think what can be so overlooked in journalism is how much it requires. It's a very human capital intense industry. And yes, technology has streamlined a few things. And yes, with this little piece of technology, I can take photos and I can record things and I can type out an article. But that doesn't mean that having one person doing all those things is really the best. And I think of that a lot with like this show. Emily helps when she can, but she is very busy with her work as a lawmaker. And so for the most part, I'm it. And I can see all the ways that this show could be better if I had some help or if I knew what I was doing. There's always that too. But, and I think about how that translates into newsrooms where, when Randy and I can go out on to cover a story together and he's taking photos and all I'm doing is reporting, it's so much easier. And I feel like I always do a better job as a reporter, not having to also think about taking photos. And I look at our newsrooms and how they get whittled down. And that might bring us to the Burlington Free Press in a moment. And a lot of the better technology allowing one person to do more things isn't necessarily what's better for coverage.
Well, think of like television used to be a two-person crew. You had the reporter, you had the photographer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in many cases, the reporter is also having to do the setups and take the video. And Gannett was notorious for starting this whole idea of a reporter is supposed to be able to write several stories a day, update the website with breaking news, take video, take photos, and just do it from your car.
Yeah. And just because you can doesn't mean that's the best way to do things. So speaking of Gannett and the Burlington Free Press, John, would you like to update us on the recent thing that made your hair curl and set on fire?
Yes, sequentially. Earlier this week, curl, and then last night set on fire. The Free Press has been cut and cut and cut. It's part of the Gannett newspaper conglomerate, which has found ways to keep local newspapers going at a drastically reduced size and scope by cutting and cutting and cutting and, finding enough ad revenue, because it's still a daily newspaper in a significant market, to keep the doors open, the lights on, and funnel profits back to Gannett shareholders. The problem is the Free Press is, it's not even a shadow of its former self. It's kind of a funhouse mirror version of its former self. Mm-hmm. I started looking at it because I know, I don't subscribe to the Free Press because honestly, it's a waste of money. I would rather give money to like we have the bridge in Montpelier, and I give them money every month. But the Free Press, I noticed, like, I get their daily email summary of what's in the paper, and I noticed the top story one day this week was basically something that had been plucked from a Reader's Digest listicle and fluffed out into a plausible story. It was about, what is Vermont's favorite comfort food? Well, according to Reader's Digest, Vermont's favorite comfort food is ... Wait until the fifth or sixth paragraph, and then they tell you maple apple pie. And I thought, I don't think I've ever had maple apple pie. And then the article went on to never again mention maple apple pie. It pivoted to plain old apple pie. And it recounted how, Vermont's made apple pie its official state dessert. And this was literally in the article. The bill was signed into law by then Governor Howard Dean, who later became famous for his scream on the campaign trail. And then there was some stuff about apple pie and cheddar cheese, and that was the entire article, which never again mentioned maple apple pie. And it was written by a Boston-based Gannett reporter whose title is Trending Reporter, and her job description seems to be to look in various publications for listicles, top travel destinations, top foods, top, this and that and the other, and, sort of take the content for each local market that Gannett's in and write a custom article based entirely. I mean, the only quote in that article about the pie was from Reader's Digest itself. They didn't go to restaurants and say, hey, what do you like about apple pie or whatever? So, that was the top story in the Daily Digest for the Free Press, and I thought that was pretty appalling. And I still do, but came across an even more appalling thing later in the week, which is that Gannett now employs a reporter named Beth McDermott, who tolls in some unknown location somewhere. And her job is she works with or alongside or underneath an AI story generator that Gannett calls Espresso. And she takes, Espresso writes articles, and she looks them over and touches them up so that they don't sound like they were computer generated, and then ships them off to Gannett outlets around her area of influence. She submits stories to papers in Massachusetts, and earlier this week, the front page of the Free Press had 2 different articles by Beth McDermott, assisted by AI. That's not even the worst part of it. The worst part of it is that her job is to take press releases and feed them to Espresso, and then tweak the results and ship them out to Gannett outlets to publish as if they were news. This is like a complete violation of what used to be journalistic ethics. Take somebody's, press release, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, makes no difference to them. And to, gussy it up as if it were news without putting any journalistic effort into it themselves.
Like not calling someone for a quote or doing any research or anything like that. Yep.
Yeah. And the fact that like 2/3 of the Free Press's front page was, taken up with these thinly disguised press releases written by somebody in some other state with the help of an AI machine, it just made me think that the Free Press and probably all of Gannett, we'd probably be better off without all those publications and with more room for new organizations to take advantage of the resources in those markets. It's just, I mean, in the course of writing about the Free Press, I looked up their staff, and they have a page for the newsroom directory. There are 6 reporters.
If they
for,
have 6 reporters, why are they doing espresso on the front page?
well, because 6 reporters isn't enough to adequately cover a city the size. I mean, that includes 2 sports reporters.
Oh, okay.
And 1 feature reporter and 1 business reporter and 2 reporters, 2 who are doing something that you might consider, you know, A section, old-fashioned reporting. And it's just not enough. So they need this filler. They need, they've got a little bit of meat and they got a hamburger helper the hell out of it to fill pages. But it's a simulacrum of what news used to be.
Randy, do you want to jump in?
Well, the listicles, I get at least 3 or 4 of them a day sent to me from PR shops.
Yeah.
Vermont is the blank, 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 whatever. And generally, I hit the delete button on them because they have no basis in reality, or they tap the same old place. I mean, Brattleboro sometimes slips in, but it's always Burlington, Montpelier, and we take 3rd place or maybe behind Rutland or Berryborough. But
unless it's a list of like the goofiest cities in the country or the most 60s cities in the country.
Yes.
And they play off the stereotypes of Brattleboro.
Yes. But, Gannett in Massachusetts now owns what used to be, 2 of the largest papers in the state, which was the Boston Herald and the Worcester Telegram Gazette. And I worked for the Telegram Gazette back in the 80s as a working multiple jobs cobbled together into enough for a bit of an income. But they used to have a dozen bureaus all over Worcester County. They printed 4 editions in the morning, 6 editions in the afternoon, and have reporters in every place filling up the paper with local news. And little by little, that's been whittled down. And a friend of mine that I worked with back in the 80s when I was there at the TNG, came by to visit in Brattleboro. She retired from the Telegram Gazette because she was about the last reporter, and they were more interested in how many clicks she could generate with her stuff. And she was a crime reporter, loved crime writing about that stuff, lived for the type of person that cruises around the scanner in the car. And they challenged her. How many clicks can you get? Can you get to 1 million clicks? And then 2 million. Somebody, I guess some Hallmark movie star was involved in some kind of stupid thing, and that got to 2 million clicks for the year. But that's it. Clicks, views. And is there any content? Is there any meat? No. It's just fill up the front page, and I can't see advertisers paying for that for that. I mean, the Free Press used to be a paper that you kind of had to read, just like you had you read the Free Press and the Rutland Herald. And maybe check on the smaller weeklies. They had people at the State House. And now there's nothing. And Digger had a lot to do with that because they came in with a better mousetrap and covered the hell out of the State House. And now they're finding out that it takes a lot of money to cover the State House, and they don't have it.
Well, the thing I find interesting with AI too is I did. As an experiment once, I did take the first few paragraphs of an article I was working on and I put it through an AI machine to see what it would do with it. And what really put me off was, sure, there were some ways where it gussied up the language or it gave it a little more pep and that type of thing. But the other thing it did was it subscribed. It created emotional intent in some of the paragraphs, and I had quoted someone and it said, "Oh, so and so said sadly," and someone else, was very upset that, and I'm like, no, 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 we don't, no, no, this is, no, no, no. That's
Said,
not appropriate at
said.
all.
That's, people forget that that's a great word. Said.
Just said. And so, giving sources emotional intent was just to me an absolute no go, no starter right there.
Machine.
So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of wonder who's uh, you putting these preferences into the program. Where are you doing that? Or a bunch of children, because we're now at the point where everyone's just out of high school to the graybeards like John and I.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's it's so interesting. I go back to, I think, what I said earlier in this segment about how technology has in some ways democratized a lot of media, both in the fictional world of like filmmaking and scripted television and stuff like that. And you can create your own YouTube series if you want. You don't need to wait for Hollywood to call you anymore. And on one level, that's really fantastic, and has opened the doors for creativity for a lot of people. On the other hand, though, again, for me, like thinking about what AI did to some of my copy and giving people intent that was not there or was not appropriate for a journalist to give, it hasn't done anything around responsibility or ethics or the things that as journalists we are, certain things have been hammered into us about what you can and cannot do. And AI doesn't care. And it shouldn't have to. It's a machine. But it makes me wonder about the people who are making the decisions around whether to use a technology like AI or not, and how they use it in journalism.
Especially for local journalism, where you kind of need the knowledge of the community and a little bit of experience of the community that a machine would not have. I mean, there's no substitute for that for institutional memory,
Mm-hmm.
and with the lack of with all the people with the institutional memory being put out the pasture or laid off or then
Burnt
discovering that
out.
there's you burnt out or discovering there's more money to be made in other professions.
Mm-hmm.
You local journalism is diminished by that, and it takes time to learn that.
Yeah.
I've always felt that for a local reporter, it takes at least two years before people trust you when you're on a beat.
Mm-hmm. As some folks may know, I write articles for Vermont Business Magazine, and I focus on a different county every month. And I often feel, boy, I bet I could do this story better if I actually lived in Middlebury or Burlington or whatever county I happen to be focusing on in that moment. Yeah, we're just about out of time, John. What would you like to add? We've kind of gone all over the landscape here.
Well, I'll say again, there are lots of bad things going on in journalism. There
Mm-hmm.
are also lots of great things going on in journalism. There are people like Randy in almost every community in the state who are trying to keep local news going and reinvent local news. Even as they are flying the plane, they are rebuilding the plane. And it's an incredible effort. Success is not assured, but there is an incredible amount of talent and energy and dedication going into this. I have dipped my toe into the national waters in this field, and I have been frankly inspired by the sheer number of people who are trying different models and doing different things and coming up with new ways to, new revenue streams. just to mention one. I have heard from a publication in Virginia that that through AI, generates an audio version of every story they publish. And it's right up there at the top of the story. If you want to listen to this story instead of reading it, click here.
Mm-hmm.
And before you hear the story, you hear a 6-second sponsor announcement. And that is a brand new revenue stream for that publication that I think every small paper in the country could do if it's appropriate for what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who are coming up with ideas like that all over the place. We have yet to put it together into a sustainable model for nonprofit journalism or hybrid journalism. But there's a lot of really good work going on. And even though I am now in the trenches and struggling to get out of the trenches and make the Hardwick Gazette a sustainable operation, I remain really optimistic about the prospects for what we're all trying to do.
Mm-hmm. I like that you brought up that example of the AR generated audio track, because I think that's a good example of, AI is a tool. And as long as we use it responsibly as a tool, it can do some good things. I think the problem is with technology sometimes is there have been newsrooms that look at it as a solution. And a solution to like, oh, we don't need so many reporters if we do this. And I think that's when you're getting into dicey territory.
I mean, a hammer is a great tool, but it shouldn't be used indiscriminately.
Mm-hmm. Randy, any thoughts before we head out?
Well, I'd say in continuing with the optimism part of the program, I think the thing to be most excited about is at the University of Vermont and their Center for Community News and the Community News Service, which is using students at UVM to help supplement news coverage to small weeklies around the state, and with the supervision of some experienced professionals, and so they're not flying solo without any supervision. So what they're producing is really good work, and you see their work all the time on Digger.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd use more of it in the Commons, except that we're still looking for people up from UVM to help us to cover Southern Vermont. And of course, Burlington's a little far away from Brattleboro, but they do an excellent job up in Chittenden County. And I'm not sure if the Gazette's reached out to any of the folks that.
We have a summer intern from UVM,
right.
Who has been highly useful in some ways, but also university students studying journalism are not often used to the pace and demands of real life front lines in the trenches journalism. So it's an adjustment for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is where you find out. It's better to find out at that stage of your career that perhaps this isn't what you should be doing than to be in a position of responsibility and then find out this isn't what I should be doing and make some mistakes that could really affect your career and affect your newspaper or outlet.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree generally that UVM's Center for Community News is doing some great stuff, and they are actually considered a national leader.
Yes, they're doing the model they've exported to many different places because they feel that the marriage of college and community is an effective source of finding people to cover those communities.
Thank you. Well, on that note, we're going to head out. We're out of time here on WVEW LP Brattleboro, but I want to thank Randy Holhut from Vermont Independent Media and John Walters from the Vermont VPO or Vermont Political Observer for joining me today. As always, the Montpelier Happy Hour is on Friday at 2 p.m. on WVEW, as well as rebroadcasted every Wednesday. Randy, if people want to read the work of the Commons, where can they go?
Well, at 260 outlets around Windham County for the paper and ink version, or online at Commons News. That's one word, Commons with an S, news.org.
And do you have Deerfield Valley News's website memorized yet?
That would be DeerfieldValleyNews.com.
Fantastic. And John, if people want to read your work.
Yeah, it's the VPO.org, or search for the Vermont Political Observer, and you will find me.
Wonderful. Have a great weekend, everyone. We will be back next week.